Hey guys, I'm here to talk in depth about Divinity Runs. Divinity is a unique trace rifle that actually stuns champions. It's the fastest and easiest way to stun overload champions. Not only that, it weakens every enemy's defense. With the rise of champions and harder content, Divinity is almost a necessity for endgame, at least in activities above your recommended power level. That's mostly Master and Grandmaster Nightfalls. However, this can also include some seasonal content as we saw in the Season of the Warmind. Without a guide, you would never know how to complete the Divinity quest, or even find out how to start it. And even then, there's a lot of things in that last step that makes it inaccessible to players. And while I can say there are shortcuts to this, the general player base struggles to acquire this weapon, and it's the worst parts of Destiny that you'll find in this quest. Divinity is a raid exotic, but not the usual kind. Previously, exotics only found in raids were tied to low drop rates for boss clears, so if you beat the final checkpoint of a raid, you have one chance per character per week to get that raid exotic. This works fine for about half of the raiders, getting the exotic in their first through 15 clears, which can be frustrating. Some players have to beat the raid upwards to 60 times just to get that exotic. Divinity, however, is a guaranteed drop. That's something that hasn't been done since the Leviathan raid came out. This should make it more accessible to casual players in theory, but it really isn't. Not to say Divinity runs are failing per se, they get completed, just without the people that started the run and 4 hours later than anticipated. The Garden raid came out in a bad state. The boss fight was so unoptimized and laggy when it came out, players on consoles were lucky to have 10 frames per second during the damage phase. On console, only one team was able to beat the raid on the first day, yet tens of completions were on PC. It's fair to say that the reduced recoil, faster movement, better field of view, and higher frames made the raid feel like two completely different activities going from console to PC. Even after patches from Bungie, it's not uncommon to lose frames in the boss fight on consoles. When you lose frames, it takes longer to aim, fire, and reload your weapons. This can get worse as an activity goes on. As ammo, glimmer, engrams, and such from players pile up, it's possible that the game could error code from the additional stress. This is the worst for Divinity runs, because if everyone gets kicked, you have to start the Divinity puzzles all over. Thankfully, this doesn't happen nearly as often as it does in the Last Wish raid, so it has become easier to do on console, but also harder in other ways. I did so many Divinity runs, I started hearing the sound of goblins sacrificing as I was going to sleep. So let's talk about 10 points as to why Divinity runs are haunting me, and why it's such an inaccessible experience for casual players. A guide is required to get Divinity. There is no matchmaking. The quality and quantity of players is worse over time. LFG contains a wide variety of people that don't work well together. The raid is pretty long. The puzzles take as long as a raid. The experience of players is a key factor to success. The information that they know can carry the run. The amount of each of the classes can change how you approach the encounter. Also, the lack of meta weapons will hinder your success. Now, if that isn't enough factors to consider on why Divinity runs are flawed fundamentally, then sit back and pick my brain for a while. A guide is required. Imagine how many players don't know that Divinity even exists. It's not like the game comes out and tells them, hey, there's an exotic missing. The casual player has to stumble across the name Divinity just to be able to discover a guide on how to get it. And that's not just a problem with Divinity. Documentation is lacking in Destiny 2. Bungie depends on content creators to explain everything, and some are better than others. Sometimes they are working with incomplete, false, previously patched, or biased information when making their guides, and that information spreads. There are usually multiple strategies to complete a raid encounter, and what's right for some may be impossible for others, namely with the gear required to accomplish a particular strategy. A player might have to watch several outdated guides to find one that they can understand, and at that point, some people give up and need a Sherpa to teach them in-game. A video doesn't make you an expert. Most video tutorials help you understand terminology and flow of an encounter, but without actually doing it, you quickly forget what you just learned. It's much easier when someone watches a guide video beforehand compared to a fresh explanation, but even still, they're going to screw up and have questions, and they aren't going to comment on some forum to get the answer. Googling will not help. You need someone who is in the encounter and understands the encounter to explain. 6 people learning from a video guide will take twice as long as having a teacher in-game. For a Divinity run, a guide known as a Sherpa is practically a necessity. This one guy we had thought he was getting Divinity, but he wasn't on the right quest step, so he was confused when he couldn't open the final chest. 4 hours he wasted, and he has to do it all over again because he never saw a guide. He never started the quest. He probably won't even bother to do it again. This leads to the next problem: no matchmaking. Now there is guided games, which matches you with players for Garden of Salvation, but there are many flaws with it. As a seeker, the queue time usually takes several hours, time you can't move from the orbit screen. The teaching group must have at least 3 clan members. Your friends might not be in the same clan, so you can't even be a guide to begin with. There's no incentive to guide players. The clan can vote to accept a player in queue. If they really don't want you, they can just cycle through people in the seeker queue and deny you from joining. And the worst part is the leaver penalty. If you have someone lag out, they can't join back in the group for an hour. It's because the game thinks they're a bad sport for leaving a guided game, so you can't join the lobby you were just in. I don't believe this has changed since I last hosted a guided game. Most of the rules do make sense for a healthy matchmaking experience, but all of this is irrelevant because guided games teams are not doing Divinity runs. Guided games is a flop. Why isn't there more matchmaking? Bungie promotes their in-app LFG instead of offering more matchmaking options. This is one way to have a fast, healthy, and good connection playlist. Anything that may not have tons of players interested 24 hours a day should not have matchmaking. Divinity Runs is one of those things. By spreading a player base thin across many activities, it really destroys the integrity and fun of the game. You can see this with the new Avengers game. There are more matchmaking activities than players. This ends up with lobbies where players never join, waiting 10 minutes in matchmaking just to load in solo on a 3-man activity. That is worse than never having matchmaking at all. That's why exotic quests don't have matchmaking, and they shouldn't. LFG is an advancing technology. LFG is when you are looking for group. LFG allows you to organize with random strangers interested in the same activities as you are. In Destiny 1, you were expected to go to third-party websites to LFG. In Destiny 2, Bungie had a forum for posts. Xbox created a built-in LFG for every Xbox game and is now #1 for Destiny 2 LFG on Xbox. Then Bungie added LFG functions in their app, which is now widely used for all platforms. But I have noticed that the skill level of players on the LFG app are worse than those on Xbox LFG, and that's because built-in LFG is easier. The easiest and quickest solution is important when you only have so long to play. Joining random players in Destiny 2 was a lot harder when it launched. Bungie has continually improved the ability to join players in-game, even making it better when Beyond Light launches. I hope to see Bungie moving the in-app LFG to a function available in game menus. LFG isn't all it's cracked up to be. When you make a post, one person controls who gets in and who is out. It's up to the biases and whims of the one individual to lead a lobby of 5 other guardians. If you make them mad, you are kicked. If you don't have the weapons, gone. If they don't want anyone under age 18, gone. The biggest factor though is experience. There's a site called raid.report. This allows players to see how many times you've completed a particular raid. Typically, you want players who have at least one completion when forming a group. This shows that you know what you are doing. This alienates newer players who want to learn the raid because they are not accepted to join a lobby to clear the raid. Say you've done the work and struggled through your first clear, you have a life and a time limit. Most players do not want to struggle to complete a raid that should be easy for those with experience. They don't want to wipe on encounters, they don't want to wait for questions. Since they had to struggle through their first clear, they feel no sympathy for those who have not. This draws a line with LFG that keeps bad players from starting altogether. The common response is for them to make their own post. Unless they wait hours for players with little experience and hope for a Sherpa to come along, it's going to be impossible to complete. This is all caused by our next point. Quality and quantity of players diminish over time. The amount of players doing Divinity, or Garden of Salvation even, is lessened over time. Those that have received all of the loot already will become Sherpas or stop raiding altogether. With Divinity being a one-time thing, the amount of players and the skill of those players goes down the toilet. This is bad news for casuals and new players alike. The best players are doing the quest the first week. This leaves casuals at a bad spot. Without the required power level, you're making it more difficult than it has to be. Way more difficult. Usually taking 20% more damage and doing 20% less damage against everything. Players should wait until they have the right power level. Since they don't play much, this could take months. And months later, players moved on to other games. The first month of Destiny is a high point. After that, there isn't really new content. Players stop coming back. These slow times aren't bad for Destiny. Everyone needs a break and then they come back. Destiny launched free to play and now free DLC for Xbox and Stadia players, so there is an influx of players needing Divinity, but they don't know how to raid. Exploits and glitches can help them out, but the players that need them don't know them, and as time goes on, Bungie patches them. So far they've fixed Infinite Voltaic Overflow, 9 times Relay Defender Damage exploit, and Instant Kill Witherhorde glitch. The point is, the longer you wait the harder it gets. This is way more severe than other raid exotics. Why? Because players will keep doing raids until they have that exotic. Low drop rates forces more playtime. More playtime means more chances at raid exotics as time passes. But doing a Divinity run is a huge turnoff. No one in their right mind chooses to take twice as long, getting the same loot for no reason. And the fact that it's a guaranteed drop means no one will come back. There's no motivation to become more skilled at Divinity puzzles. The only motivation is either your friends begging you or extreme boredom. Moving on, we have the LFG slot machine, or so I would call it. Since we struggle to find anyone, we are willing to accept everyone. Say you manage to find 5 other people for a Divinity run. Who do you have? Maybe you have a person without a mic. If you're on PC, you have text chat. On console, this can mean you won't ever be able to do the quest. It's hard enough with communication. It's pretty much necessary if you aren't being carried. I wouldn't consider a Divinity run as the same as a Divinity carry. If there are 3 or 4 people with tons of clears, it's considered carrying. I would say 2 or less is considered an actual run. The difference is the amount of work everyone has to do. The whole raid can be 3-manned, so I would say that means you need at least 3 confident players to carry a team. If you're running stacked with top 10% raiders, you can avoid teaching players the basic mechanics and still progress the raid. When the players need to understand the mechanics and their roles to complete the encounter, that's not a carry. And that can be a problem. What if you get a kid in your lobby? It's possible their parents may tell them it's time to get off halfway in. I joined a 10-year-old's lobby, and he left once we made it to the boss. He didn't even finish the final puzzles. We also had a no-mic person in that lobby. Now someone else has to take charge or disband the lobby, then someone has to spend time finding a replacement. Eventually, the no-mic got his Divinity though. Some players are normally good, but occasionally are under the influence of various things while gaming. And we all have different personalities. People that don't like talking, people that aren't coordinated, toxic people, people that don't have the patience for long sessions, and people that have no clue what raids require. To say that anyone can raid is not true. I got my wife to try a story mission, and it took her an hour. It was 8 minutes long. Being that you're desperate for people, you take what you get. When they join, it's impossible to know how long it will take or how long they have to play. Or if that group plans on making small talk while you're trying to do callouts, or if the group is going to be way too quiet, the frustration builds. What if there's background noise, like a loud fan or a toilet mic? You know, the one that's so bad it picks up their neighbors outside and you can't understand what they're even saying? Even accents can be hard to understand. All of this leading to longer experiences. The length of the raid is a main point. When you join, you don't know how long or how irritated you will be, how many times players will die, how many almost completions, how lucky you will be. Divinity runs are usually 2 to 8 hours long, sometimes even 12 hours depending on your luck. Pretty much every Divinity run takes a little more than 4 hours to complete. If you think you will finish a Divinity run with the same people who started it, you would be mistaken. I've been in many Divinity runs on Xbox. People even drop out at the boss, and this only increases the time it takes for a completion. Your patience wears thin, words get said. The raid isn't that difficult, but the longer you go on, players actually perform worse. They haven't eaten, they're getting bored and tired, second guessing their choice to be in the run, and you keep cycling through people until you make it or everyone leaves. One of my Divinity runs, all of the original people left. It's sad, really. This recent Divinity run I joined, only one of the original people were left at the end. It was 6 hours long. By the time the raid was done, he had been working on it for 6 hours. You better believe he appreciates his divinity, and the only reason we got it done so quickly was because I used glitches in every encounter, except for the first one because that was patched. Yes, 6 hours was quicker than it should have been. Our team would have wiped a lot longer if I didn't destroy shields without a buff, push the boss off the map, and instantly fill the right conflux. If I wasn't there, it may have never got done. Next point. Players' experience level is important. You need someone who knows what they are doing, or it's like stumbling in the dark. If this is someone's first raid ever, it's not going to end well. There are plenty of people that say just let me run around and shoot stuff, but that's not enough in this raid. Experience also ties into other factors, like how to take out anti-barrier champions, how to stay alive, how to multitask. In Divinity runs, running out of revive tokens is an easy way to wipe, and it happens too much. People die and keep going, but in the end, it comes back to end the run. The only way to progress is with experience, and to have experience, you need to fail, many times, until each run creates a rhythm for each individual role to follow. Each time, the team learns more about the encounter. Watching a video or listening to an explanation ends up going through one ear and out the other until they do a couple attempts to add context to what they've heard. Time is experience, but players don't want to struggle a second time through a Divinity run. It's not a fun experience. You're throwing away hours of your life for a painful experience and no additional reward. After you're done with Divinity, you have no reason to do another one, and that's not your fault. It's kind of Bungie's fault for lack of incentive. You can see that flawless heals create incentive to help more casual player base, even though that ends up being high skilled players recovering the account and playing for them. Not to say that Divinity runs are any different, people are paying $20 for someone else to complete a Divinity raid for them. Sadly, Divinity can become a business decision instead of an experience. Why is it so hard? All it takes is one person to ruin a run, and multiple times at that until they get it right. And you aren't going to kick that person because you are already 2 hours in. You know half their life story and you're about to adopt them into your family. It's like you've created a bond after staring into the face of certain death that cannot be shaken. Redoing encounters is like insanity. You basically do the same thing over and over until you get a winning result. I've had the same loadout and super as this other player, yet he consistently did 5 times less damage than me. It's not because I'm amazing, it's that he was doing something wrong, and unless you call them out and find the problem, they won't learn. Turns out it was DPS time, but they were shooting the goblins next to us. Like goblins were going to sacrifice or something? The next problem is the length of the puzzles. A small puzzle here and there would be fine, but not only do you need to activate the puzzles in a secret room, you need all 6 players to complete 7 puzzles throughout the whole raid. That effectively adds an hour or more to Divinity runs. Outbreak in Destiny 1 is the longest raid puzzle, but Divinity comes close. It's way overcomplicated and hard to follow for no heir apparent reason. Is this Destiny at its best or at its worst? Each of these puzzles takes coordination, assigning positions, and a little bit of skill, even some problem solving. And Bungie saved the worst puzzle for last. Try explaining that you need to trace a line between 6 plates. It turns into geometry, pattern analysis, and a counting game. The one guy could not understand position 1. He couldn't count to 1. It took 5 times explaining that the line to the first plate is number 1. I mean, it's in the look with your eyes section. And every time he said, Oh, I understand. Only to be the last guy on a plate. So you put your worst player at the ends and you struggle until you make it. This one puzzle has taken 30 minutes to do. I've had almost all of the puzzles take around 20 minutes each in some cases. Sometimes they get lost and then they have to leave the raid just to join back to find the puzzle and finish it. That's 2 hours to spawn a single chest, and it has to be done in the same raid. If you leave, you lost your progress. Prepare to do all of the puzzles with a new team. It's way too unforgiving. While it's an amazing and unique experience, the casual players can't or don't want any part of it. It's not like players are looking for instant gratification, but doubling a raid's length is overkill. Garden is already the longest activity in the game. I mean, is this too MMO for Destiny? My next point is information. The raid has so many moving parts, so many technical details, strats, exploits, cheeses, and bugs. Information can carry a run, and I did just that. After 2 hours, we finally managed to make it to the center area, but we fail at something as simple as tether. We're at the final part of the second encounter, but nobody has the buff, so I have to switch to colony and body block to exploit the shield mechanics until we can save the run. It should have been a wipe. The next encounter, I lure the goblins away from the conflux so we have infinite time on Moat's team. This gave the team plenty of time to practice, but we still wiped because we ran out of revive tokens. Then I pushed the boss off the map, but we still needed to body block and colony until the boss was registered dead. It would have taken hours to have survived long enough for 3 damage phases. And then we were doing triple right strat because some players were really bad at staying alive, but this didn't really help because they were also bad at building. Even on the final run, we needed 3 teams to go in left because of sacrifices. It's crazy how one player can hold back an entire team. And when we wipe, you look at DPS, and you try to make suggestions. There is one trick that can drastically improve a Divinity run, and it's backtracking. The problem is you need a boss checkpoint to do it, so only players that have already did the raid once and purposely saved a checkpoint can do this, and it has to be the same week as the Divinity run. Either way, this saves hours. To backtrack, you load up a boss checkpoint, you walk all the way to the beginning of the raid, then you invite everyone and do all the puzzles. You don't have to stop to do any encounters. You do the puzzles, you kill the final boss, you get Divinity. Players have to learn one checkpoint. They aren't tired out and they won't feel like leaving. This is the easiest way to carry a Divinity run. This can get a little tricky though. Bungie didn't intend for players to go to the beginning of the raid. This is seen with the big drop entering the second area. It's impossible for hunters to jump that high. Titans and Warlocks actually have to use in-air super activation to gain extra height on top of max mobility just to get up that long drop. This could take some time and practice. Doing the backtracking method actually makes Divinity runs worth completing more than once, but getting a boss checkpoint is still a pain and not easy for a casual player to get a hold of. Even if you have a boss checkpoint, what if you can't jump up that big drop? And this is where my next point comes in: class makeup. In raids, Bubbles and Well of Radiance can be the difference between 2 and 3 damage phases, and with bad players, it's hard enough to survive that long. Since you take what you get, you may have no Warlocks or no Titans. Maybe only one of each. I had a run with no Titans. One time, we still didn't kill him after 3 damage phases. And with Divinity runs, there's nothing you can do to change that. Odds are, they only have one character leveled up, and if you changed character, you would still need to get the Divinity questline on that character before joining back. Not having multiple Warlocks would mean you can't do well strat. Not having a Titan, or in my case, only a Titan who had Thunder Crash on, after asking him to politely switch to Bubble, can hurt your overall DPS. Pro tip, don't use Arc Supers in raids, it's not helping. It's hard to tell people what to do sometimes without intentionally hurting their feelings. Seeing that they are a brother that you adopted and know their life history, you may just let them do their own thing. Which leads to my final point: access to meta weapons. People in Divinity Runs, or just teaching first time raiders in general, won't have the best weapons or setups. Odds are they won't have Xenophage, they won't have Mountaintop, they might not even have Whisper if they are new. Even if they did, they won't have the damage catalyst. They don't know reload canceling. This man had the worst DPS, and I checked what he was using. He was using Two-Tailed Fox. I immediately asked him, "What other exotic heavies do you have?" The man would have done better with Izanagi's or a line in the sand, not that they have those either. Recluse used to be a necessity in this raid, and people still don't have it. One guy was shooting eyes with a hand cannon. We died multiple times because he couldn't destroy his eye fast enough. Your expectations have to be really low to finish out a Divinity run. You might even need a snack break. I've been in raids where they don't have Nighthawk. They don't use Actium War Rig. Another great way to boost damage and survivability is through raid mods, but seeing that they probably never done the raid, they don't have the armor to use those mods on, or the mods themselves. In Destiny, the rich get richer, and the poor tend to wander aimlessly. Bad players need guns like Xenophage just to have acceptable damage against bosses, but they don't have the skill to get the gun. If Destiny established more catch-up and casual focus systems, then maybe hardcore players would be able to put up with the gap between their experience levels. Helping casuals helps everyone complete activities faster. It's a win-win, as long as butthurt tryhards don't complain that they had to do more work. I honestly think that giving more base unlocked quests, exotics, and mods to everyone would lessen the confusion and misery of the New Light experience. I started a fresh account after New Light launched, and it is pretty confusing. Do bad players have the right to get free raid exotics? With the new kiosk system, who knows? Is it wrong to hand out exotics after a limited exclusivity period? What about power leveling? Bungie has offered power level bumps such as free 1020 and 1050 Solstice of Heroes armor and previous power surge bounties from Drifter. It helps hardcore players when others aren't penalized with power caps. Matchmaking is power level based, so players under recommended will have a bad experience playing with similar power players. I used to do heroic strike carries, picking up players who got one shot by everything, then practically soloing the strike. People are willing to throw themselves into impossible situations. I've seen it time and time again, even with very little hope for victory. Does time requirements alienate too much of the player base? When you play Destiny, you commit at least an hour. Anything less than an hour does nothing. It's like paying the minimum payments on your debt. Are longer questlines what people want? When the Forge questline was per character, people were mad. It was so long that they didn't want to do it 3 times. Exotics that take 2 steps, like Devil's Ruin, were kind of a letdown though. Are hard to get exotics Destiny at its finest? Xenophage, Outbreak, Thorn. Usually the biggest gripe is PvP requirements. But Bungie has been doing better, introducing quests with multiple different paths to progression. Are low drop rate exotics worth chasing? I guess so, except Teraba. Few people go for it. And it's not because the gun is awful, it's that it was implemented wrong. Why not have something as simple as storing its unique perks progress when it's stowed? We need a gun that complements our arsenal, not controls it. Here are some of my ideas that could help close the gap between overwhelming content and casual friendly content. You could have exotic quests auto-start in your inventory after a year. This would cut down on the Googling, YouTubing, and general confusion, as well as level the playing field without hurting anyone. Save progress on Divinity puzzles per section. Right now, you don't need to complete any puzzles to get Divinity. Just join a lobby where it's already done. While this helps to find people at the boss, it undermines the entire quest line. You should force the players to complete the puzzles once, but then players could kill the final boss on their own time, any day, not here and now. When the boss is beat, drop the loot. Having a second chest is the worst decision Bungie could have made. I've heard horror stories of people who leave early, thinking that Divinity didn't drop for them, but it did for everyone else. One time the host grabbed the chest and brought everyone to orbit before everyone else opened it. Remember, they think once a chest is open, everyone got it. There are also some players that are toxic and kick people after completion but before the loot is collected. This can't be fixed and has happened to many players. Bungie should move away from this forcing individuals to collect their own loot nonsense. They should have a teacher in game. The quick tips and loading screens are garbage. Players need frequently asked questions. They need a text guide with a search tool in the game. Half of the items in collections have misleading sources listed, and too vague descriptions at its best. You have an in-app LFG. How hard is it to run that from the game? You can already manage your inventories remotely. Bump up players' power level every season. None of this 750 power crap. It's an artificial grind with no purpose anyway. If the power cap goes up by 200, I want players to get free blue armor and weapons that are a season behind. Lazy players need a 260 power climb, while caught up players should need less, like 200. It's a win-win. I'm tired of seeing power boost consumables that cost $20 in silver when it's not even that helpful. 1000 power still isn't enough to play activities on alternate characters. These new players need less things to worry about, but cutting half of the game size isn't the long-term solution they need. Here's to hoping that the new Destiny experience is an easier one. Have your own opinions? Of course you do. Let the comments commence.
Cheese forever, Guardian.